There comes a moment when words no longer matter, when silence speaks louder than explanations. In that silence, a man faces his deepest truths, what he lost, what he ignored, what he took for granted. This isn't about revenge or ego, it's about realizing the value of peace when it's too late. You see, when silence first enters a man's life, it doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly, unnoticed, like a shadow in the corner of a familiar room. At first, he believes it's temporary. A pause in the conversation, a cooling off period, a break that won't last long. He convinces himself that silence means nothing. But that's the first mistake, because silence always means something. It's not empty, it's full of everything that was left unsaid, everything that should have been appreciated but wasn't. At the beginning, he's comfortable in the quiet. He assumes you'll reach out first, that your patience, your empathy, your love will once again bridge the gap, because that's what always happened before, right? You were the one who understood. You were the one who listened. You were the one who held the connection together when it started to fray. But this time, this silence feels different. There's no tension, no waiting, no storm building, just a stillness that lingers too long. He scrolls through his phone, hesitates over your name, types and deletes messages. He tells himself she's just busy or she needs space. But deep down, something shifts. He feels the absence. It's not just about the lack of communication, it's about the absence of energy, presence, and care that once filled his world. The silence isn't just external anymore, it starts echoing inside him. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. Silence reveals more about you than any argument ever could. When someone goes quiet, you're forced to face yourself. You start to see your patterns, your neglect, your arrogance, your assumptions, the noise of daily life, the distractions, the pride, the excuses, they all fade. What remains is the raw truth of who you are when nobody is validating you, when nobody is forgiving you, when nobody is waiting for you to change. This is where the awakening begins. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with emptiness. That emptiness is clarity. It's the sound of life showing you what you had and what you lost. When a man realizes that the silence isn't meant to hurt him, but to teach him, it shakes him to his core, because for the first time, he can't fix it with words. He can't charm his way back. He can't apologize his way into the same space he took for granted. Silence removes negotiation, it removes control. It's just truth standing still. And that's what makes it powerful. When you've been the one giving, supporting, showing up, your silence becomes the loudest message of all. It tells him, I've said all I needed to say. It tells him, I'm not angry, I'm done. That's a language no words can compete with. Because real growth, real realization, doesn't happen in noise. It happens when you're left alone with your thoughts long enough to hear the sound of your own accountability. He begins to remember the small moments, the ones he overlooked, the texts left unanswered, the conversations half listened to, the times you reached out and he was too distracted, too sure you'd always be there. Those memories return like ghosts, not to haunt him, but to show him the truth he avoided. That's the power of silence. It's not punishment, it's presence. It demands awareness. It holds up a mirror to the parts of him he refused to see. And when he finally realizes that your silence isn't a game but a boundary, that's when it hits. That's when he understands that the noise he misses was never just your voice, it was your energy, your care, your consistency. The first lesson of silence is this: it's not about absence, it's about realization. It's the universe's way of saying, now you hear what words could never teach. So remember this: when your silence is misunderstood, don't rush to explain it. The right people will understand it without words, and those who don't were never really listening in the first place. Reflection hits differently when the noise is gone, when the calls stop, when the messages no longer appear, when the laughter that once filled his days is replaced by stillness. That's when the mind starts working in ways it never did before. At first, he tries to shake it off. He fills his days with distractions, music, work, company, noise, anything to drown out that uncomfortable quiet. But silence has a way of catching up. It doesn't chase, it waits. And when it finds you, it demands reflection. Now he's sitting with his thoughts he's ignored for months, maybe years. He begins to ask questions he never asked when everything was easy. Why did she stop talking? When did things start to change? Was I really listening when she was trying to tell me something? That's where real reflection begins, not in regret, but in recognition. recognition of all the small moments he dismissed, all the subtle signals he overlooked. See, most people don't reflect until they lose comfort. As long as things feel secure, the mind stays on autopilot. But silence breaks that pattern. It removes the comfort. It forces you to look inward. It's not just the absence of someone's voice. It's the absence of validation, the absence of attention, the absence of being seen. And that absence makes you confront who you are when nobody is feeding your ego. That's when a man begins to see his own patterns, the selfishness, the pride, the way he took peace and called it boredom. There's a kind of honesty that only silence can bring. When nobody's there to challenge or comfort you, you start hearing your own truth. You start to see how often you used words to defend your behavior instead of understanding it. You start realizing that the problem wasn't that the other person stopped talking, it's that you never learned how to listen. And that's the heart of reflection, listening to yourself without the noise of excuses. The human mind will do anything to avoid accountability. It will rewrite stories, justify actions, and create villains out of people who only wanted peace. But silence breaks those illusions. It doesn't argue, it doesn't defend. It simply shows you who you are when the performance ends. That's what makes this stage of realization so heavy. He begins to see not just what he lost, but why he lost it. He sees how he confused presence with permanence, how he thought love meant forgiveness without change. Reflection brings truth, and truth brings discomfort. But that discomfort is the first step toward growth. You see, silence has a strange mercy in it. It doesn't expose you publicly, it exposes you privately. It gives you space to face yourself without judgment. It gives you a chance to rebuild your awareness before life does it for you. The man who learns from silence doesn't just seek to get someone back. He seeks to understand what part of himself he abandoned when he stopped paying attention. And that's the difference between guilt and growth. Guilt keeps you trapped in regret. Growth uses reflection as fuel. When you stop running from silence and start learning from it, it transforms you. It teaches you empathy. It teaches you patience. It teaches you to value what doesn't demand your attention but deserves it. So when reflection hits, don't fight it. Don't numb it. Let it teach you. Because the same silence that exposes your mistakes also offers you wisdom. It's your chance to break the cycle, to become aware, not ashamed. At some point, every man who loses something real has to face this truth. You don't grow from being heard, you grow from learning to listen. And the silence you once feared, that's life giving you the space to finally do it. You know, one of the hardest lessons a person ever learns comes when they realize the true weight of what they've lost. Not just the person, but the value that person carried. The value that was hidden in the ordinary moments, buried under consistency, disguised as normal. That's the tragedy of human nature. We often only see the worth of something once it's gone. We mistake presence for permanence. We confuse availability with obligation. And then one day, when silence replaces presence, we suddenly see how much that presence meant. At first, he doesn't call it loss. He tells himself it's just a phase, that people drift, that time changes things. But what he's really doing is trying to avoid the truth, that he had something steady, something loyal, something peaceful. And he took it for granted. He thought peace was supposed to be exciting. He mistook calm for dullness. He didn't realize that the stability he found so predictable was actually the rarest form of love. This is where the weight of lost value begins to press down, because silence forces him to remember, not the drama, not the conflict, but the peace. He remembers how effortless it was to talk to you, how you made things simple, how you didn't demand much, just honesty and presence. But when someone lives in noise, peace feels unfamiliar. They think they want intensity until they lose tranquility. And then suddenly they start craving what they once dismissed. That quiet reassurance, that safe energy, that love that didn't have to scream to be real. That's the paradox of value. It often hides behind consistency. You only realize its power when the consistency stops. You start noticing the gaps, the small gestures that once went unseen, the morning text that no longer comes, the tone of understanding that's no longer there, the energy in the room that used to make everything feel okay. That's when he begins to understand what he really lost. Not a person, but peace itself. It's a painful awareness because it's irreversible. Once you see the difference between real and temporary, you can't unsee it. He starts comparing everything and everyone to the peace he once had. But nothing feels right. Nothing feels as grounded. because no matter how much noise he surrounds himself with, there's a part of him that knows silence never felt so loud until he realized it was permanent. Psychologically, this is what we call delayed appreciation. The mind often fails to assign value in the moment because it's distracted by novelty. It chases stimulation, attention, validation, excitement, and overlooks the quiet strength of consistency. But once that consistency is gone, the mind rewires. It starts replaying memories through a new lens. That's when the truth sinks in. You didn't lose something ordinary, you lost something irreplaceable. And that realization cuts deeper than heartbreak. Because it's not about wanting someone back. It's about realizing you didn't value them when you had the chance. It's the weight of knowing you were careless with something sacred. That's not regret, that's awakening. You see, every relationship, romantic or otherwise, teaches us something about value. The wise learn early. They learn to recognize what brings peace, what nurtures growth, what sustains love. But the unwise learn late, when silence becomes their teacher, when peace turns its back, when love stops showing up. So here's the truth. Value doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It just changes form. It becomes the lesson. It becomes the voice inside your head reminding you to never overlook what feels calm, to never take for granted what feels easy, and to never confuse silence for indifference. Because sometimes that silence isn't absence. It's the echo of what you failed to value. Never wait for silence to teach you what presence was already showing you. You see, silence has a language of its own. And when it's coming from strength, it speaks louder than any outburst, any explanation, any desperate plea for understanding ever could. There's a kind of silence that isn't born from fear or defeat, but from power. The power that comes when you finally realize you don't have to prove your worth to anyone anymore. That's the silence that transforms lives. That's the silence that says, I'm no longer fighting for peace. I am peace. When you reach that point, people don't know how to handle it. They're used to reaction. They're used to you explaining yourself, defending your emotions, trying to make them understand. But silence changes the equation. It's unsettling because silence holds control. It's not passive, it's deliberate. It says, I've outgrown the conversation where my value has to be negotiated. And that's something most people aren't ready for, especially the ones who thrived off your emotional responses. See, there's a psychological shift that happens when a person chooses silence intentionally. It's not suppression, it's self-mastery. It's the moment you realize that engaging isn't always empowering. You start to understand that every word you speak has energy, and not every situation deserves that energy. Silence becomes your filter, separating what's worth your voice from what only deserves your absence. This kind of silence doesn't come easily. It's born out of pain, out of lessons learned the hard way. It comes after you've spent years trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. It comes after you've exhausted every version of yourself trying to be enough. And then one day you wake up and realize you don't have to keep explaining yourself to those who benefit from pretending not to hear you. That's the moment silence becomes strength. There's a discipline to it, a quiet authority. Because when you choose silence, you're not withdrawing from life, you're reclaiming it. You stop reacting to noise and start responding to truth. You start protecting your peace instead of trying to prove your point. And that shift right there is maturity. It's wisdom in motion. People often mistake silence for indifference, but real silence isn't cold, it's centered. It's the space where clarity lives. It's where you see things for what they are, not what you wish they were. You begin to recognize that your energy is sacred, your voice is valuable, and your peace is non-negotiable. You no longer chase closure from others because you've already given it to yourself. That's when silence becomes your boundary. It's not about punishing anyone. It's about protecting yourself. You're no longer running toward or away from anyone. You're simply standing still in truth. And that stillness, that calm, that refusal to engage in chaos, that's where your real strength shows. Because it takes courage to say nothing when everything in you wants to respond. It takes discipline to walk away without making noise. And here's the truth. Silence reveals what noise hides. When you stop speaking, people show themselves. They reveal their intentions, their respect, their maturity. Some will crumble under the weight of your calm because your silence exposes their instability. Others will finally hear what they couldn't before because silence gives your absence a voice. Either way, you win. You win because you've chosen self-control over self-destruction. You've chosen to guard your peace instead of trading it for temporary validation. And in that choice, you redefine power, not as dominance over others, but as mastery over yourself. So remember this: the strongest voice in the room isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one that says nothing because it no longer needs to. Regret doesn't make noise. It doesn't show up in arguments or apologies. It arrives quietly, like a whisper at 2 a.m. when the world is asleep and the mind has nowhere left to run. That's when it hits him, not in a burst of emotion, but in the stillness. That's when he realizes the silence isn't just the absence of your voice, it's the echo of everything he didn't say when he had the chance. See, silence has a way of turning memory into a mirror. It reflects the truth he spent so long avoiding. At first he thinks he misses you, but it's deeper than that. What he really misses is the version of himself that existed when he had your peace, your presence, your consistency. He starts to notice how the little things, the ones he once brushed off, now haunt him. The way you used to listen when he spoke, the way you stayed patient when he was distant, the way you brought calm into his chaos without ever needing recognition. Those things seemed small then, but now, in the quiet, they're all he can hear. That's what makes regret so heavy. It's not about losing someone. It's about realizing you were careless with something sacred. When he finally understands that your silence is forever, he feels the weight of his own indifference. He sees how his pride built walls where there should have been bridges, how his ego silenced the conversations that could have saved everything. And now, there's nothing left to fix, just the sound of his own thoughts replaying the moments he wishes he could redo. What most people don't understand is that regret is not immediate. It's delayed. It waits until life slows down, until there's no more noise to drown it out. That's when it starts to speak. And it speaks with clarity. It tells him the truth, that she wasn't asking for perfection, just effort, that she wasn't asking for the world, just consistency, that the silence he thought meant peace now feels like punishment. Philosophically, regret is the mind's way of seeking reconciliation when it's too late. It's not about punishment, it's about awareness. It's the moment life shows you what you took for granted by taking it away. And here's the thing: silence doesn't create regret. Behavior does. Silence just amplifies it. It's the final consequence of all the times he chose comfort over communication, pride over vulnerability, and ego over love. That's the painful beauty of it. Silence gives space for realization. It doesn't scream, it teaches. It doesn't accuse, it reveals. And when that realization finally arrives, it's humbling, because regret strips away the illusion of control. It reminds you that time doesn't wait, and neither do people who value peace. You start to see that some silences aren't meant to be broken. They're meant to be respected. So when he sits in that silence long enough, he begins to understand something profound. Silence doesn't just reveal loss, it reveals character. It shows who you become when words no longer work. Some people grow bitter in silence, others grow wiser. Some drown in it, others rebuild from it. But the one who caused the silence, he carries it differently. Because his regret is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It's the ache of understanding that the door he took for granted is now closed for good. That's when he learns the final truth: silence isn't always peaceful. For the guilty, it's loud. For the self-aware, it's transformative. And for the wise, it's a reminder: never let pride speak so loudly that it drowns out love's quiet voice. Because once silence becomes permanent, words lose their power forever. There comes a moment after all the noise fades when you realize that silence doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a home. It's the space where healing begins, where strength returns, where identity is rebuilt. Because while he's wrestling with the echo of what he lost, you're learning to rise in the quiet. You're learning that silence isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new one. At first it feels uncomfortable. You're used to giving, to explaining, to caring for someone who never matched your energy. You're used to filling the silence with words, with effort, with love that was rarely returned at the same depth. But then one day you stop. You sit with the stillness. You breathe. And in that moment, something powerful happens. You start hearing yourself again. That's the turning point, because silence isn't just about the absence of another voice. It's about the rediscovery of your own. You start realizing how much energy you poured into being understood instead of being at peace. You start seeing how much you tolerated in the name of love, and how much of yourself got lost in the process. That's when the silence starts to change. It stops feeling empty and starts feeling sacred. You begin to recognize that this quiet isn't loneliness, it's alignment. The truth is, peace is expensive. It costs everything that doesn't honor you. It costs the people who drain you, the situations that exhaust you, and the habits that keep you small. Rising in the quiet means understanding that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's where you regain the focus, the discipline, and the faith you lost while chasing people who were never meant to walk your whole journey with you. And that's something a lot of people never learn, that your silence, your peace, your distance are not acts of bitterness. They are acts of evolution. You're not avoiding anyone, you're elevating. You're not rejecting connection, you're refining it. You're learning that not everyone deserves access to your calm because your peace took too much work to build. That realization changes the way you move, the way you speak, the way you choose. You no longer need to prove your worth. You embody it. You start to glow differently when you no longer seek closure from others. You start walking with confidence when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You realize that silence can be power, but it can also be peace, the kind that doesn't need attention, just authenticity. And that's what rising in the quiet truly means, not being louder, but being clearer, not being tougher, but being truer. Philosophically, this is where transformation happens. When solitude stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like liberation. It's when you stop needing external validation to feel whole. It's when you stop running from yourself and start running toward purpose. Because real power doesn't come from being heard, it comes from being grounded. It's not about winning someone back. It's about winning yourself back. When you reach that point, you stop seeing silence as a void. You see it as a vessel, one that carries wisdom, growth, and clarity. You realize that peace isn't the absence of struggle, it's the presence of strength. The same silence that once felt heavy now feels holy. You don't beg for understanding. You don't chase closure. You don't fear solitude. Because you've learned that what's meant for you doesn't need convincing. It recognizes your peace and protects it. So when the silence becomes forever, don't mourn it, master it. Let it refine you, not define you. Let it remind you that you don't rise by making noise. You rise by standing still in your truth. Because sometimes the loudest comeback isn't a word, it's your peace.